Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Okay, happy Thursday everybody. Let's begin with the Chinese economy, and specifically we have several updates related to local fiscal conditions and the housing crisis to cover. Chinese financial media outlet Yicai Global reports this week that several local governments in China are accelerating the release of new bonds, with the intention of issuing the whole year's quota by the end of September, quote, in order to hike investment and boost a spluttering economy, end quote. According to the report, the capital, Beijing, and 15 other provincial-level regions plan to issue over 1 trillion yuan, $138 billion in bonds in the third quarter, with the intent to have the entire bond allocation for the year spent by the end of the third quarter. The decision to front-load the spending like this suggests that though the central government has not yet announced large-scale stimulus plans, many local governments need to bring forward activity in order to meet growth and employment goals. The Yicai report observes, quote, local governments should issue bonds faster to achieve results as soon as possible in order to realize this year's economic growth goal, end quote. There is likely also a hope that they will be permitted in Q4 to begin to access the 2024 allocation of bonds. The nation had issued around 4 trillion yuan, over $500 billion of local government bonds as of the 25th of June. This consists of around 2.5 trillion yuan of new bonds, which are mainly invested in major infrastructure projects, and 1.5 trillion yuan in refinancing bonds, which are mostly used to repay the principal of maturing government bonds. Of course, as regular viewers know, local governments' fiscal conditions are closely tied to the housing sector, as land use rights sales constitute a large part of local government revenue. This week, there are several rumors going around that housing restrictions initially put in place to mitigate systemic financial risks will be eased in order to boost the battered real estate market. One of the rumors getting a lot of attention is that second-tier cities will remove most, if not all, housing purchase restrictions, which would be a significant development. This has already happened in lower-tier cities this year. State-run China News reports this week that since the beginning of this year, close to 20 cities have relaxed home purchase restriction rules, with some third-tier cities having altogether scrapped purchase restrictions. UK-based Reuters also reports yesterday that 4 more Chinese developers have received refinancing approval from China's securities watchdog. These developers can now place new shares for financing. Restrictions had been placed on the sector's equity fundraising following the debt crisis back in 2021. The debt crisis within the sector still remains, however, suggesting that this move is more about getting activity and some confidence back to the sector despite the risks. Indeed, in recent days, 2 more Chinese developers, Central China Real Estate Limited and the smaller Lending Holdings Group, have failed to meet dollar bond payments. The market isn't terribly surprised, however. Quote, most smaller privately owned developers still face dire liquidity conditions because of the muted recovery of contracted sales, end quote. Meanwhile, this week the eHouse China R&D Institute published its residential inventory report, which found that among 100 cities surveyed, 68 cities have a destocking cycle of more than 14 months. Quote, this means that the housing sales situation in nearly 70% of the cities is quite dire, end quote. And one final thing while we're on housing. According to a recent report by Fitch Bohua, a unit of Fitch ratings, quote, early mortgage repayments climbed to a 5-year high in China at the end of the first quarter, end quote. The report also predicted a new record high for this quarter. Thus, with this brief survey of the sector today, we can safely conclude that the housing industry remains in a very bad place. China is still very much suffering from a housing crisis. Next up, the National People's Congress has passed the so-called Law on Foreign Relations of the People's Republic of China. According to Article 1 of the new law, the purpose of the act is to safeguard China's sovereignty, national security and development interests, protect and promote the interests of the Chinese people, build China into a great modernized socialist country, realize the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, promote world peace and development, and build a community with a shared future for mankind. Commentators and analysts, including yours truly, are still trying to figure out just what this new law means practically and what the salient implications are. In the meantime, at least state media has provided commentaries which give us an idea of the spirit and intention of the legislation. Quote, "For the first time, the law states the purpose, conditions, and policy orientation of the application of Chinese law in foreign relations, and stipulates principles and measures to counter foreign countries, individuals, or organizations." End quote. And, quote, "The law also provides a legal basis for the diplomatic struggle against sanctions, anti-intervention, and long-arm jurisdiction, and aims to constantly enrich the legal toolbox and develop the ways and means to safeguard national interests, which could also play a role of prevention, warning, and deterrence against Western hegemony." End quote. Note the word struggle. State-run Xinhua writes that the new law will help the country, quote, "advance a foreign affairs agenda on multiple fronts, at different levels in various areas and of multiple dimensions," end quote, and, quote, "put into action the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative," end quote. Next up, we will see that the United States has its own legal toolkit, increasingly employed in its own competition with China, especially in decoupling or de-risking in advanced technology. Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. Liking, sharing, subscribing, this is a huge help for the channel. Anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. As always, thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Yesterday, US financial media outlet The Wall Street Journal, citing unnamed government sources, broke the news that the US Commerce Department could move as early as next month to stop shipments of chips made by Nvidia and other chip makers to consumers in China and other countries of concern without first obtaining a license. Such a move would make it even more difficult for PRC firms to buy advanced chips from Nvidia, further choking China's technology ambitions. These chips are vital to the development of, among other things, generative AI models. The US already requires a license to sell the most high-end AI chips, like Nvidia's A100, a GPU chip with advanced 7nm nodes, and the H100, a 4nm technology, to customers in China. Nvidia's A800 and H800 chips, now in the crosshairs, were specifically designed to get around these restrictions. The Wall Street Journal writes that action would be put to finalize rules codifying and expanding the export control measures announced by the US in October of last year. The US administration is, quote, "also considering restricting leasing of cloud services to Chinese AI companies which have used such arrangements to skirt the export bans on advanced chips," some of the people familiar with the discussion say. End quote. Soon after the Wall Street Journal report, UK-based Financial Times, citing its own unnamed sources, reports that the US Commerce Department is still debating the move and that a decision has not yet been made. Nvidia chief financial officer, speaking to the outlet yesterday in response to these reports, expressed that these restrictions would, in the long term, quote, "result in a permanent loss of opportunities for the US industry to compete and lead in one of the world's largest markets, and the impact on our future business and financial results there," end quote. US officials are also weighing whether to restrict the leasing of cloud services to Chinese AI companies. US outlet The New York Times writes this week, quote, "Over the last 18 months, the Biden administration and members of Congress have ramped up their exploration of what can be done to address security concerns about the cloud computing divisions of Chinese tech behemoths like Alibaba and Huawei," end quote, adding that US officials have discussed whether they can set tighter rules for the Chinese companies when they operate in the United States, quote, "as well as ways to counter the company's growth abroad," end quote. Will the above-mentioned chip restrictions end up being put in place? The market appears to believe they very much could. China is one of the largest semiconductor markets in the world, representing about a fifth of Nvidia's total revenue. In after-hours trading, Nvidia slid as much as 3.2%. Its rival, Advanced Micro Devices Inc., fell about 3%. Chinese players, who are far more exposed, were hit harder. In trading yesterday, Inspur Electronic Information Industry Co. Limited and Unisplendor Corp. Limited Both hardware suppliers in the mainland were down 10%. Okay, if the restrictions are put in place, the next question is, will they work? That is, will they achieve the US goal of retarding Chinese technology, especially advanced semiconductor ambitions? It's hard to say. Quote, Chinese AI firms may also be able to source dedicated AI chips from third-party countries, so I think it will be hard for the US to enforce the regulations. While further restrictions could delay AI developments by Chinese firms, I don't see a major long-term impact as Chinese firms take an increasingly innovative approach to workarounds. End quote. Thus, we will have to see. But on China Update, we will continue to follow the US-China technology war as it continues to unfold. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.